All right, here we are back in our optional scene setting with the wind blowing outside really hard. So we're gonna try to get this done and get my phone plugged back in. But we are over here because who did we talk about on Thursday? George Washington Carver. And he was somebody who we found out a little bit loved plants. We said, what happened to him in the very beginning? First of all, what was he? Right, he was a slave, and he and his mother were slaves, and he and his mother were both taken by what were called slave raiders. These slave raiders would go into cabins and they would steal slaves from their owners and sell them to other owners to possibly make more money. And what happened to George's mother? We don't know. She was never found. Mr. Mose Carver, the owner of George and his mother, found George, the baby, but did not find the mother. And so we don't know what happened to her. But Mose and Sue Carver, hold on one second. Can you stop? Okay, sorry about that. Mose and Sue Carver raised George and his brother James like their own sons and took good care of them. And as George is growing up in the house with Aunt Sue, they called them Aunt Sue and Uncle Mose, right? Aunt Sue and Uncle Mose. As they grew in that house, Aunt Sue is going about her business. She's doing her normal things, knitting. And what would George say? I could do that, right? And he would. You know, this is kind of a knit material in my sweater, or maybe it's crocheted, I don't know. But look at how cool that is and what the time would take for somebody to be able to do something like that. But George thought, I could do that. And he got an old sock and an old mitten and unraveled them, got some turkey feathers and pulled the feather parts off and used the quills, and he started to knit. And it was beautiful. Aunt Sue was very surprised. And then he did some crocheting as well. And again, that was the most beautiful lace Aunt Sue had ever seen. She was amazed at his handwork that he could do. He also saw something else that he thought he could do. Right, you remember he saw that painted picture in a house and he just stared and stared. And he went to his favorite place, the woods. Yes, the woods. And he decided, I don't have any paints or any brushes, but I think I could probably use some of the stuff that's out here. Let's use this small sharp stone and we'll draw and scratch a picture onto this big large rock. And I'm going to crush some berries and I'm going to make that into paint. And I'm going to use the leaves and the dried twigs and things to paint my picture. And he stood back and he thought, I knew I could do it. Because he was a hard-working young boy, and he wasn't going to let things stop him. And we'll see how that helped him throughout his life. He was always going to figure out a way. So we said he had a special hobby, and his special hobby was going to his secret place. And where was that? We already said, into the woods. And he would look and check out the plants, and why is this one growing so well, and why is this one struggling, and how come? And he would be looking at those plants and figuring things out. Well, we are on page 372, and it says, we start off on the very top of the page, and George is in his secret place in the woods. What is the name of that strange looking plant? The plant growing by that pine tree is dead. Why? This plant looks sick. I wonder if I can make it well. If I plant a red flower next to a white one, will a pink flower grow? The woods were full of questions for George. How could he find the answers? More and more he wanted to go to school. He must read books. He must find the answers. Books have a lot of our answers. I know Google does too, but books are good to be reading to get lots of answers right there. The woods were the best place in the world to George. He always had a special happy feeling in his heart when he was there. He felt that someone, capital S, was watching over him. Maybe, he thought, this someone has a plan for me. Maybe he will help me find the answers to my questions about plants. It was not long before George's neighbors gave him that nickname that I was telling you about. And I think it's the nickname that you heard if you watched the Xavier Riddle little bit that I had. The plant doctor. That's what they called him, the plant doctor. Any housewife, I love this part, who had a sick plant growing in her yard would ask the plant doctor what was wrong. And George many times would make that plant better. Now, I just can't help it. You know my mind. I just imagine, you know, George is in the backyard and he's playing and, you know, Mrs. Smith comes from down the street. Hi, Sue. I just want to know, can you send George to my house? I have something I need him to look at. I need him to come check my plants because I think they're dying. And Aunt Sue's going to go out. Georgie, come on, honey. Mrs. Smith needs you to go check out her plants. Okay, Aunt Sue, I'm coming. So he's just going to Mrs. Smith's house. Well, Mrs. Smith, I think that you're watering your plant too much. Why don't you not water it for the next couple days? See how it does and let me know. And then, you know, remember they didn't have phones back then, so she would go tromping down. Sue, tell the plant doctor that he cured another plant. I've heard about him. I mean, it was Mrs. Andrews that told me about him, and that's why I came here, so that I could get help from the plant doctor. And he did it again. He's great. And I just imagine that everybody in town is hearing about the plant doctor. And go ask him. And poor George is trying to play, and he can't because all these people are like lined up. Like, can the plant doctor come to my house next? Can the plant doctor come check out my plants next? And how cool that this young boy was known as the plant doctor and helping so many people with their sick plants. A desire to learn. Aunt Sue saw George's desire to learn, so she began teaching him the alphabet. Remember, they didn't have schools back then for black children. Soon he could read and spell. But Aunt Sue, I've got to go to school. There is so much to learn. And I shouldn't say not schools for black children, but only in certain places. Aunt Sue looked worried. The nearest school that George could go to was in another town. It was too far for George to walk back and forth. If he went, he would be completely on his own. That means that he would be having to live on his own and figure out food and money for clothing and whatever. Like, he couldn't, it was too far to go back and forth. So he would be completely on his own. He would have to find a place to live. He would have to earn his own money for food and books. But George was only 10 years old. 10-year-old can't live on his own. Like, you don't just send a 10-year-old off and say, okay, hope you can find a place to live in the other town. But that's what she was going to have to do if he wanted to go to school. Don't worry, Aunt Sue and Uncle Mose. I can do it. I know I can do it. At 10? George. Oh. Look at the bottom of page 373. A new home. Early the next morning, Aunt Sue helped George pack up his few clothes and gave him food for the trip. Then George began the 18-mile walk to the town of Neosho. Now, I know it's not the 200, 300, 500-mile that we were talking about with Booker T. Washington and his family and others that we've talked about. But for a 10-year-old boy, 18 miles to another village, that's why he couldn't go back to another village, another town. That's why he couldn't go back and forth. He walked to the town of Neosho. Can you say that? Neosho. After walking all day, George looked at the one-room cabin that was the Lincoln School, named after Abraham Lincoln. He would be attending this school beginning the next day. But where would he sleep that night? I mean, it's great. Okay, here's where I'm going to be going to school, but where am I going to sleep? Where am I going to stay? His feet were tired. Oh, how he just wanted to rest. Finally, he spotted a barn ahead. I can sleep up in the hayloft, George thought to himself. But what if the farmer comes out? Up he climbed and buried himself in the sweet hay. The next thing George knew, it was morning. He got up quickly. How hungry he was. A cabin sat near the barn. George wondered if anyone was home. Suddenly, the cabin door opened. Before he could run away, a woman stood before him. What do you want here, young man? Oh no, what's going to happen with George? George told her his story. When he finished, she put her hand on his shoulder and said, "Oh, what are you waiting for? Help me bring in some firewood and let's fix some breakfast." Whew, thank goodness. This lady is nice and she doesn't mind George, and she's going, "Come on in, I'll feed you, no problem." "Thank you," said George as he carried in an armful of firewood into the cabin. "This is Andy Watkins, my husband. My name is Mariah. Just call us Uncle Andy and Aunt Mariah," she said with a big smile. God was watching over George. As long as George was in Neosho, he stayed with Uncle Andy and Aunt Mariah. How easy that was solved, right? He decided, let me stay in this barn I happen to see. That barn happened to belong to this family, the Watkins, Mariah and Andy. And they're saying, you can stay with us. While you're here, feel free. You can stay right here in our home with us anytime you're in Neosho. He loved them as much as they loved him. He knew he should work to repay their kindness. I mean, he's got to do something to pay them for what they're doing. He can't just stay there for free. So one thing he knew that he learned, because remember we said he wasn't a very strong boy, so he couldn't go out in the fields and help Uncle Mose with Brother James. One thing that Aunt Sue taught him was how to wash clothes, at least. He knew that. So he knew how to wash clothes. Often he would prop his book over the school book over the laundry tub. Now, this wasn't the laundry like you're thinking today. Oh yeah, push the button and you're done. No, this was a big bucket that you would have a washboard. This okay, this isn't it, but I'm just gonna lift this up, my little ab roller thing. Something like this, okay? And they would roll the clothes over it and wash, but this would be sitting inside a big tub, and he would be scrubbing and scrubbing. So he would put his book and prop his book up, and he'd be washing the clothes and he'd be studying. That way he could study as he scrubbed the clothes. He cooked, he cleaned, and he did many chores around the house. Aunt Mariah taught him how to iron clothes. Now you're like, why did they just tell us that? I mean, is that really important? Oh, it will be, but we can't find out why it's important today. We're going to have to wait till tomorrow to find out why it's important that he knew how to wash clothes and iron clothes and all that good stuff. It's going to be an interesting thing. He's not going to get another nickname, but he is going to be talked about again. He was talked about for his plant work before, being the plant doctor in Diamond Grove, Missouri. Now he's in Neosho, and now he's going to have people talking about him again about something that he did amazingly well. So we'll find out some other things, special gift and special things that he's able to do as he has to move again. We'll talk about all of those things. So stay tuned for tomorrow. There's my plants again, my sweet little plants. All right, we'll see you tomorrow in our optional setting. And hopefully we won't have all the crazy wind going. I know you can't really see it that well anyway, but the crazy wind going on out there, hopefully tomorrow will be more normal. All right, have a great day, stay safe, and be happy.